So, number 3 in our Advent series, just a little bit of recap. On week 1, Angela looked at the gift of others and looked at the story of the angel coming to Mary and then Mary going off to visit and stay with Elizabeth. And then last week, Mark looked at the gift of movement and the story of the shepherds. And today we're going to look at the gift of seeking. And a little bit later on, we'll go into the story of the wise men coming with their gifts to Jesus. Now, one of the things that I really like to do is to look up into the sky on a really clear night. I'm sure lots of us have done the same. And it's awesome, isn't it, when we just look up into the sky. And it fills me with a sense of awe at just the cosmic beauty. And I'm sure many of you have sat out at night and looked at the stars. I remember when we lived in Devon one night, in the middle of the night, there were no street lights for miles around. Mervyn and I took a chair outside and just sat and watched the shooting stars. I'm sure some of you have seen shooting stars up on Birkwood Common. And then more recently this year, there was an opportunity to see the Northern Lights, wasn't there? Now, I'm not sure who took the photo on the left. It might have been Michael or Rob, but a photo of the Northern Lights on the Hode. And then the same day, Jo sent through this picture where she was watching the Northern Lights in Canada. And when I look at things like that, it makes me feel very small. And it reminds me that I'm part of a much larger reality. And King David felt the same as he was writing Psalm 8. He said, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them." And Psalm 19 verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." Now, I've got 4 points to this talk. And so my first one is, the stars teach us about God's glory and his power. And Abraham Lincoln once said, "I never behold stars that I do not feel I'm looking into the face of God." God determines the number of the stars and he calls them each by name. We discover that in Psalm 147. Each star has a name. And I encourage you to read the whole of Psalm 147 at some point when you're at home. It's a psalm of real massive contrast, which praises God for the creation and care of this awesome universe as a whole, and yet also the salvation and care of his people. The power that numbers all the stars in verse 4 is the same one that heals the brokenhearted in verse 3 and sustains the poor in verse 6. And in the same way that God knows every single star by name, he also knows the name of every single person. He knows your name. And back in the Old Testament, we read about a man called Abraham. And he's considered to be one of the first people, there were a few, but one of the first people to worship and recognize the one true God, as opposed to the worship of many gods, small g. And there was a special relationship between God and Abraham, and it included promises that extended way beyond Abraham's lifetime, even to us, 4,000 years later. And it was then, and it is now, God's desire for every single person to believe in him and to know him. We sang that in our last song, "I want to know you. I want to know you more. I want to reach out and touch you. I want to hear you." And that's God's desire for every single person, to know him in our everyday lives through faith. Now, Abraham, way back, was told by God, he was given a promise that his descendants would be as countless as the stars of the sky. Remember, God numbers every single star. He knows how many there are, but to us, they are countless. And then in the New Testament, Paul discusses the idea that those who have faith in the one true God are included as Abraham's children, his descendants. Galatians 3 verse 7 says, "Understand then that those who have faith are children of Abraham." And Paul says that being a child of Abraham means doing what Abraham did, which was believing in God. Abraham is considered a faith father because he showed how to trust in God, even when things looked impossible. And it's not a blind, irrational, unevidenced faith. In the book of Romans, Paul also draws us back to the awesome creation as a powerful witness to God's existence. He says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that all people are without excuse." That's from Romans 1. And so all of Abraham's descendants, whether physical or spiritual, which includes us today, if we believe in God, have names. And our loving Father God knows all of us. And in Isaiah, he assures his people with this incredible verse. He says, "See, upon the palms of my hands, I have written your name." "See, upon the palms of my hands, I have written your name." That's in Isaiah 49. So God doesn't create countless stars or countless people in meaningless batches, so many that they don't mean anything. God knows each individual by name. And this powerful, all-knowing God wants to be in a personal relationship with each one of us, as we've already sung about this morning. And this came home again to me really forcibly at the beginning of this year when I was on a sabbatical and I was out walking in Grisdale Forest, and an old song that I used to know years ago came really vividly to mind. And it's a song written by Ralph Carmichael, and I'm just going to read you a few of the words. And it says, "In the stars his handiwork I see. On the wind he speaks with majesty. Though he rules over land and sea, what is that to me? I will celebrate nativity, for it has a place in history. Sure, he came to set his people free. What is that to me? Till, by faith, I met him face to face, and I felt the wonder of his grace. Then I knew that he was more than just a God who didn't care, who lived away out there. Now he walks beside me day by day, ever watching o'er me lest I stray, helping me to find that narrow way. He's everything to me." On to number 2, second point. God speaks to and draws all people to himself. And in the Christmas story, God, whom Abraham knew, made himself known to his people. God draws and calls all people to himself, often speaking to them through their culture in a language that they can understand, leading them to Jesus. And these wise men, or magi, they're an example of this. The magi were spiritual seekers, and they were seeking to know from signs in the stars what God's purposes in the world were. And Jesus said himself many years later, he says, "Seek and you will find." The love of God is like a vortex that draws us to himself. And these scholarly Eastern magi were seeking. We sang about that earlier as well, didn't we? How wide, how deep, how high is the love of God, how strong and sweet. It's like this vortex which just draws us into the very heart of the Father. And so these magi, they were seeking throughout the Bible. And as we saw through Abraham's relationship with God, we find that God draws and calls all people to himself. And his long promised intention was to come into the world himself through his Son in a way that we could understand, to speak to us and demonstrate God's love in a way that we might be able to receive it. And ultimately, he was to take the blame and pay the price for all the sin that prevented us from being able to know him. Some verses in Corinthians. When anyone lives in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone. The new is here. All this is from God. He brought us back to himself through Christ's death on the cross. Come back to God. Christ didn't have any sin, but God made him become sin for us, so we can be made right with God because of what Christ has done for us. And a common misunderstanding that we can have about God is believing that he has not made himself known, or that he is far away and distant. We often hear people refer to the big guy upstairs as if he's not close to us, as if he's not with us. God provides a pathway of discovery for all who seek him. That's a statement I've been thinking about quite a lot during the week, and it's a really powerful statement. God provides a pathway of discovery for all who seek him, leading people to himself. And that's definitely the story of these wise men. It's a great illustration of how God makes himself known and longs to be in relationship with us. And God worked in a unique way in their journey through a star that led these magi to the creator of the stars. So let's just read that passage, the story of the wise men. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, and this is from Matthew. This happened while Herod was king of Judea. After Jesus' birth, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the child who has been born to be king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose. Now we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard about it, he was very upset, to put it mildly. My comment. Everyone in Jerusalem was troubled too, so Herod called together all the chief priests of the people. He also called the teachers of the law. He asked them where the Messiah was going to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied. "This is what the prophet has written. He said, 'But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are certainly not the least important among the towns of Judah. A ruler will come out of you.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men. He found out from them exactly when the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and he said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report it to me. Then I can go and worship him too." Well, we know he had no intention of going to worship. He actually wanted to destroy him so that there was no threat to his rule and to his throne. So after the wise men had listened to the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them. It finally stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. Back to our joy theme. The wise men went to the house. There they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures. They gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But God warned them in a dream not to go back to Herod. So they returned to their country on a different road. On to point number 3. If you want to experience Jesus, you must be willing to be interrupted and inconvenienced. Well, firstly, who were these magi or these wise men? Well, they were most likely from Persia. Persians were renowned stargazers, and somehow their study of the sky led them to Jesus. We read earlier, some men who studied the stars came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the baby born to be king? We saw his star and we've come to worship him." Now, according to an associate professor of religious studies, called Kristen Swenson, looking to a star was very much in keeping with the religious tradition of that place in time of looking to the heavens and the stars and the planets for information. These men, they were possibly astrologers who served in the Zoroastrian temples of Persia, searching the stars for omens and prophecies. Now, these wise men from the east, they were Gentile foreigners. They were nothing to do with the nation of Israel, to whom the prophecy of a baby born to be the king of the Jews was given. They did not know the one true God as Abraham did, and then Israel had come to know. And yet they were prepared to utterly disrupt and inconvenience their lives in a quest to seek out a king that didn't belong to them in order to meet and honour him. A journey of over 500 miles, over a long period of time, potentially up to 2 years, if they set out when Jesus was first born. Now, interestingly, elsewhere in the Bible, astrologers and stargazers are denounced multiple times in passages like Isaiah 47. And the way we've come to view stars has been perverted by horoscopes and astrology, which are to be discarded as false. The stars, although given as signs, contain no power in themselves and are never to be worshipped. And so their theology was actually idolatrous. And yet, because of their commitment to seek out this baby king, they experience God's guidance on this pathway of discovery for them and encounter this king in person as worshippers. How many of us can testify to a story like this? Our lives may be in direct disobedience to the ways of God, and yet through our genuine seeking of him, we find ourselves encountering his Son in a way that changes our lives forever, as we experience firsthand the kindness and the mercy and the love of God for ourselves in our own pathway of discovery. This is the story of many Christians, actually, who stumble their way to Jesus, living in disobedience to God, yet prepared to seek, prepared to put their lives on hold and to find him, and in so doing, find that everlasting life that he promises. And so, final point, just to recap the first three. We had the stars teach us about God's glory and power. Number 2, God speaks to and draws all people to himself. Number 3, if you want to experience Jesus, you must be willing to be interrupted and inconvenienced. And number 4, worship God and give him your best. And these magi, these wise men, modelled how we are to respond to Christ, to Jesus. And one aspect of the visit is the list of gifts presented to Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the primary significance of the gifts lay in their great value. They were indeed gifts fit for a king. These were great treasures given in an act of worship. These pagan visitors are acknowledging this baby king, promised to the Jewish people first and then to the whole world, with gifts that they did indeed consider him as a king. Their worship was generous. They honoured God with the resources they'd been given. And true worship is always an encounter with God, causing us to bow down and to bring the best that we can bring ourselves. And in seeking him and giving him ourselves, we find him. Ephesians 3 says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And this story of the Magi illustrates how God provided a pathway of discovery for those who seek him. Here's a question for you and for me to mull over. How are we seeking God today in our everyday lives? How are we seeking him? For everyone who asks, receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. And so to conclude, God really does make himself known to the world through the incarnation of Jesus, God with us. You can seek him for yourself, no matter what state your life may be in. Seek him anyway. Make seeking him and finding out what the big deal is about Jesus. Make it your priority. Talk to him. Ask him to reveal himself to you. Read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and read what Jesus says about why he came. Put everything else on hold in order to discover him and to know him. Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, means that God who is pursuing us, drawing us and calling us to himself. As he worked in the lives of the wise men, he will work in our lives today if we seek him with our entire being. Will we seek him today? Thank you.